Logo: the Harvest Festival. I woke up to a quiet morning in the suburban neighbourhood. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a golden light over the houses and trees. It was a peaceful scene, one that made me feel grateful to live in such a beautiful place. I got out of bed and went to the window to take in the view. From there, I could see the small community pond in my backyard, shimmering with the early morning light. It was a popular spot for walkers and joggers, and I decided to take a stroll around it to start my day. As I stepped out onto the street, I felt a chill in the air. The early morning mist was still hovering over the ground, creating an eerie atmosphere. The only sounds were the chirping of the birds and the distant hum of traffic. I made my way to the community pond, and as I walked around it, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a sense of unease settled over me. It was as if there was something lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. The pond was surrounded by trees and bushes, which made it hard to see what was beyond them. I walked a little faster, trying to shake off the feeling of being followed. But the farther I walked, the more I felt like something was closing in on me. Then I heard a rustling in the bushes, and I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I waited to see what would emerge. But nothing did. It must have just been a squirrel scurrying through the underbrush. Relieved, I continued my walk around the pond. The sun was higher in the sky now, and the mist had burned off, leaving a clear blue sky. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me earlier. As I finished my walk and headed back to my house, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to the quiet suburban neighbourhood than met the eye. Something lurking just beyond the surface. I'm a freelance graphic designer, by the way, and had just moved into the neighbourhood a few weeks ago after a long journey of self-discovery. I suppose that my sense of ease stemmed more from my inherent fears that my neighbours wouldn't accept my new identity than from any true danger bubbling away unseen. But boy, was I ever wrong. I had a lot of work to do that day, with several projects to complete for various clients. I started with a logo design for a new startup, working on sketching out different ideas until I found one that felt just right. I then moved on to a banner design for a local charity event, playing around with colours and graphics until it was perfect. As I worked, I found myself getting lost in the creative process, the outside world fading away as I focused on my art. It was a welcome distraction from the strange feeling I had experienced earlier, and I felt my anxiety ease with each stroke of my stylus. But as the day wore on, that sense of unease began to creep back in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, and every time I looked up from my computer, I felt like I was being watched. I tried to focus on my work, but it was really hard to concentrate with that feeling hanging over me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I got up from my computer and went to the window. Outside, everything looked normal. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. But the feeling persisted, like there was something just beyond my line of sight. I took another deep breath and tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just stress, I thought, or my imagination running wild. But as I sat back down at my computer, the feeling only grew stronger. Finally, I decided to take a break and step outside for some fresh air. As I walked around the neighbourhood, I noticed that everything seemed different, like it was distorted somehow. The trees seemed taller, the houses closer together, and the sky was a darker shade of blue than I remembered. It was then that I realised the truth. Something was very wrong with this suburban neighbourhood. There was something evil lurking just beneath the surface. Something that was slowly infecting everyone and everything around me. I couldn't quite tell you how I came to that realisation or why I knew it to be true. As I lay down in my cosy bed that night, I felt a sense of peace finally settle over me. The neighbourhood was quiet, and we could hear the hum of crickets outside. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, feeling safe and secure. But as the night went on, things began to change. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound outside my window, a scratching noise that seemed to be coming from the bushes. I lay there, frozen, as the noise grew louder and more insistent. Finally, I got up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but the scratching continued, a slow and steady rhythm that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off and went back to bed. But I could not get rid of that feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was as if the neighbourhood had come alive in the darkness, taking on a sinister quality that was almost palpable. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination. There was nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I knew something was amiss. As I lay there in the darkness, I could feel the evil lurking just outside my window, waiting for me to let my guard down. Finally, exhausted and afraid, I drifted off to sleep again. But even in my dreams, the feeling persisted, a shadowy presence that followed me wherever I went. When I woke up the next morning, I felt drained and unsettled. The events of the night before had left me shaken, and I knew that I had to find a way to uncover the truth about what was going on before it was too late. That day, I tried to go about my normal routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was so very, very wrong. It was this ever-persistent feeling that would not let go. As I worked on my latest project, my mind kept wandering, and I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought. That's when I heard a knock on the door. I got up to answer it, wondering who it could be. When I opened the door, I saw my neighbour, Pauline, standing on the doorstep with a friendly smile.
"Hi, Tina," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I just wanted to stop by and say hello. We haven't had a chance to chat since you moved in."
I smiled back at her, grateful for the distraction. Pauline was friendly, and I had appreciated her warm welcome, since I was just moving in to the suburban neighbourhood. We chatted for a while, catching up on the latest neighbourhood gossip and talking about our respective jobs. Pauline seemed normal enough, and there was something about her that made me a little bit uneasy. Maybe it was the way her smile seemed a little too wide, or the way she kept looking at me as if she was sizing me up. As we were about to say goodbye, Pauline invited me to a dinner party she was having the following evening.
It'll be fun, she said. Just a small get-together with some of the neighbours. You should come.
I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to spend more time with Pauline. But I didn't want to be rude, and I figured it might be a good opportunity to get to know some of the other people in the neighbourhood. Sure, I'd love to come, I said, hoping my voice didn't betray my nervousness. As Pauline left, couldn't shake the feeling that something was rather off about her invitation. Maybe it was just my overactive imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I couldn't name, lurking beneath the surface here. That's when I saw an email notification pop up on my screen. I opened it and saw that it was from a new client, someone I had never worked with before. The message was short and to the point, asking if I was available to create a logo for them. I was intrigued, but also a little wary. The client didn't give me any information about what the logo would be used for, which was unusual. Normally, clients were very specific about their needs, telling me exactly what kind of logo they wanted and what it would be used for. But this client was different. The email simply said that they needed a logo and that it was not for a business. There was no mention of what the logo was for or why it was so important. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should take on the job. But I was always up for a challenge, and the mystery of it all kind of intrigued me. I replied to the email, asking for more information about the project. But the client was just as mysterious in their response, simply telling me to be creative and to use my imagination. I started working on the logo, trying to come up with something that would capture the client's vision. But the more I worked on it, the more uneasy I felt. There was something off about this whole project, something that made my skin crawl. As I worked on the logo, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting in over my head. But I couldn't stop now. I had to finish the job and deliver the logo to the mysterious client. The sum of money the client offered was too good to pass up, and I needed the income. I agreed to the job, and the client sent me a contract to sign. The contract was extensive, but the terms were clear. I would create the logo for the agreed upon price, and I would not ask any questions or seek any additional information about the project. I signed the contract, feeling a mix of unease and excitement. The thought of the money that I would earn was thrilling. The lack of information and the strange circumstances surrounding the job made me feel, well, uneasy. So I began to work on the logo. The lack of information became increasingly frustrating. I had no idea what the logo was for or what it would be used for, which made it difficult to come up with any meaningful ideas. But I persevered, pouring all of my creativity and skill into the project. The client had given me a deadline, and I was determined to deliver the best possible logo by the agreed upon date. Days turned into weeks, and I worked tirelessly on this project, putting in long hours and sacrificing sleep and personal time to get it done. The more I worked on it, the more I realised that something was not right. The lack of information and the strange circumstances surrounding the project really began to weigh on me. I felt like I was in over my head, that something sinister was lurking beneath the surface. I continued to work on the logo, despite my growing unease, determined to just deliver it to the client and collect the very large sum of money they had promised me. But deep down, I knew that I had made a mistake by taking off the job, and that I would pay a heavy price for it. After signing the contract, I had received an email from the client with vague instructions about what the logo should look like. They wanted something simple, yet unique, that would stand out and be instantly recognisable. Beyond that, there were no specific guidelines or requirements. I spent several hours working on that logo this particular day. As I worked, I just knew everything about this was not right. Eventually, I decided to call it a night and try to get some rest. But as I lay in bed, I found myself unable to sleep. My mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange circumstances surrounding this job. I tossed and turned, trying to clear my mind and relax, but it was no use. The unease and anxiety continued to gnaw at me, and I found myself getting more and more worked up as the hours ticked by. Finally, in a fit of frustration, I got out of bed and went back to my computer. Maybe if I worked on the logo a little more, I could find some clarity and put my mind at ease. But as I opened the file and began to work, I realised that I was only making things worse. The more I focused on the logo, the more I became convinced that something was seriously wrong. There was a darkness to the project that I couldn't ignore, and the unease I felt was only growing stronger. I knew that I had made a mistake, but it was too late to back out now. I had signed the contract. There was no going back. I would have to see the project through to the end, no matter what the consequences might be. After finishing my breakfast, I decided to go for a walk around the neighbourhood. Maybe some fresh air and exercise would calm my mind and alleviate my nerves. As I walked, I tried to enjoy the sights and sounds of the streets, but every friendly wave and cheerful hello from my neighbours only made me feel more uneasy. It was as if everyone around me was oblivious to the darkness that loomed over life. I tried to shrug off the feeling, focus on the beauty of the neighbourhood, but I just couldn't ignore the nagging sense of dread that had settled deep within me. The chirping of the birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze only added to the eerie atmosphere that surrounded me. With each step, I felt like I was being watched, like someone or something was stalking me from the shadows unseen. But when I turned around, there was never anyone there, only the empty streets and the silent houses. Eventually, I decided to head back home, feeling no more at ease than when I left. I hoped that I could find some solace in my work, but the unease and anxiety continued to gnaw at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, horrifyingly wrong. I shut down my computer and went to get dressed, choosing a black dress that made me feel confident and comfortable. I spent some time doing my hair and makeup, trying to make myself look presentable for the gathering, as it was tonight. As I drove over to Pauline's house, my mind continued to race. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just off about the whole situation. I wondered if anyone at the party would notice, or if I was the only one who sensed the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. When I arrived at Pauline's house, she greeted me warmly and led me inside. The party was in full swing, with people milling about, chatting and laughing. But despite the festive atmosphere, I couldn't help feeling on edge. I tried to mingle and make small talk, but my mind kept drifting back to the mysterious logo project and the unease that it had brought into my life. I wondered if anyone at the party was connected to the project, or if I was just being paranoid. Eventually, I managed to somewhat relax and enjoy the evening, chatting with Pauline and her guests and sipping wine. But even as the night wore on, that nagging sense of unease remained, like a dark cloud over my head. As the party progressed, Pauline and her guests gathered around a large dining room table to enjoy a delicious dinner. I took my seat next to Pauline and surveyed the spread of food in front of me, feeling grateful for the distraction. The conversation around the table was light and jovial at first, with everyone chatting and laughing as they passed dishes around. But as dinner wore on, the topic turned to the upcoming fall festival that Pauline and her husband were hosting in a few short weeks. As they discussed the event, that sense of unease began creeping up inside of me once again, stronger than before. There was just something about the way they spoke that seemed off, like they were keeping some hidden agenda from me. The more they talked, the more my mind began to race with suspicion and doubt. Was there something sinister lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly innocent event? Was I just being paranoid, seeing shadows everywhere where there were none? I tried to keep up with conversation and contribute where I could. But every mention of the fall festival only served to deepen my sense of dread, until I just couldn't ignore it any longer. I excused myself from the table, claiming that I needed to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. Something was definitely not right, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stick around long enough to find out what it was. After taking a few deep breaths to calm my nerves, I returned to the dining room and tried to act as though everything was normal. The feeling of unease lingered, making it difficult to enjoy the company of the other guests. As the meal came to a close, I mustered up the courage to make my excuses and head for the door. "I'm so sorry, I'm not feeling very well," I told Pauline as I stood up to leave. "I think I should head home." She looked concerned, but understanding. "Of course, Tina. Please, take care of yourself. We'll have to catch up soon." I nodded quickly and made my way out of the door, feeling relieved to be free from the tension in the air. As I walked down the street towards my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. Once I was safely inside my home, I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the sense of foreboding that clung to me. But even as I changed into my pajamas and settled into bed, I knew that I wouldn't be able to rest until I got to the bottom of what was really going on. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling a sense of determination to finish the logo for my client. As I made my way to my computer, I noticed an email from the client requesting a change in the design of the logo. They wanted me to use symbols instead of letters, and provided a list of symbols to use in place of each group of letters. The instructions were clear enough, but the task was still a challenge. had to stop often and consult the reference to make sure I was using the correct symbols in my sketches. As I worked, the day outside turned from bright and sunny to overcast and gloomy. The wind picked up, causing the trees outside to sway violently. Despite the unsettling weather, I remained focused on my work, determined to complete the logo to the best of my abilities. Hours passed, and as the evening approached, I was lost in my work. The symbols had taken on a life of their own, and I was completely absorbed in the process of creating the perfect logo for my mysterious client. Finally, I stepped back from the computer, satisfied with the final result. The logo was unique, powerful, and spoke to something deep within me. But even as I admired the work, a nagging feeling of unease settled right in the pit of my stomach. Something about this project still just didn't feel right. I took a deep breath and hit send on the email containing the sketch of the logo. Almost immediately, a reply came back from my client, thanking me for my work and requesting that I create a physical drawing of the logo on canvas. The client offered a sizable sum of money in compensation, and I couldn't resist the offer. I accepted the job, feeling both excited and anxious about the prospect of creating the strange logo in a physical form. The client provided me with the dimensions of the canvas they wanted. I made a mental note to head into town the next morning to pick up the necessary supplies. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my mind was racing with thoughts of the logo, all of the strange events surrounding it. The next morning, I woke up early and got dressed. I made my way to the local art supply store, picking out a canvas, paints, and brushes that would be suitable for the project. As I checked out, I couldn't help but feel that same sense of unease settling over me once again. I returned to my home studio and set up the canvas, ready to begin the physical drawing of the logo. The symbols flowed effortlessly from my hand, taking on a life of their own as I worked. As the hours passed, I was completely absorbed in it, losing track of time and everything else around me. Finally, I stepped back from the canvas, feeling a sense of satisfaction with the completed work. The logo was even more powerful in its physical form, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I sent a picture of the finished drawing to my client, who was pleased with the result and immediately wired the promised sum of money into my account. But even as I celebrated the success of the project, a nagging feeling of dread was eating away at that pit in my stomach, reminding me that something not right. I heard pounded in my chest as I opened the door to see Pauline standing there. Pauline smiled at me and came inside to collect the painting. I hesitated for a moment, but ultimately allowed Pauline to come in. Pauline walked over to the canvas and examined it closely, nodding her head in approval. She then turned to me and thanked me for my work, saying that the client would be very pleased. That feeling of unease started ringing alarm bells in my head again, but I tried to push it to the back of my mind. So she was involved, the mysterious client, acting as a go-between to retrieve this painting. Pauline then handed me a large envelope, saying that it was the remainder of the payment for the job. It was strange, since the money had already been wired into my account. I told her so. Pauline let me know it was a bonus for getting things done so quickly. I thanked her, but my mind was racing. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. I was scared. As Pauline left, I sat down on the couch and opened the envelope. Inside was a large sum of cash, far more than I had ever expected to receive. But as I counted the bills, I noticed that some of them had strange markings on them. My unease grew stronger as I realised that the markings were the same symbols the client had requested for the logo. I couldn't understand why it would be on the money. Suddenly, my phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but ultimately answered it. "Hello?" I said, tentatively. The voice on the other end of the line spoke, and my blood ran cold. It was the client, and they were thanking me for my work and telling me that they had big plans for the logo. I tried to ask more questions, but the client ended the call before I could. I sat there in shock for a moment, before my instincts kicked in. I couldn't tell you why, but somehow I knew I needed to get out of my apartment and go somewhere safe. I quickly gathered my things and headed out the door, not looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I needed to get as far away from the client and Pauline as possible. I was confused and scared when the client told me that someone would be by shortly to collect the painting. I didn't give the client my address, so I didn't know how they would be collecting it, and Pauline had already collected the painting. I walked down the street, trying to clear my head and shake the fear that was weighing down on me. I would have just driven away, but I had stupidly left my car at Pauline's the night of her party. What had possessed me to drive my car to her house and then walk back home? I couldn't say. The more I thought about the phone call, the more my mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Who was the voice on the other end of the phone? What did they want from me? And more importantly, how did they know my name and phone number? As I walked, I noticed the streets were unusually quiet. It was as if everyone had disappeared, leaving me alone in a desolate world. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. My heart was pounding in my chest and I began to run, my legs carrying me faster and faster down the street. I didn't stop until I reached a park on the other side of town. I collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath. It was then that I noticed a figure standing in the shadows, watching me. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Who was this person? What did they want from me? I tried to get up and run, but my legs were like jelly. I couldn't move. The figure stepped out of the shadows, and I saw that it was Pauline. She walked over to me, a strange smile on her face. "You seem upset," she said, her voice cold and distant. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and no words came out. Pauline handed me a glass of water, and I drank it down quickly, my hands shaking.
Are you feeling any better?
She asked, her eyes narrowing in on me. I nodded weakly, still too scared to speak. Pauline's smile widened, and she patted me on the shoulder. Good, she said. Now, let's talk about that logo you created. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a dimly lit room, and my head was throbbing in pain. I tried to move, but my hands and legs were bound, and I couldn't escape. I looked around and saw that I was in a basement with walls made of concrete. There's nothing in the room except for a small table in the corner and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I try to recall what happened, but my mind is hazy. I remember Pauline's invitation to the dinner party, the mysterious client, the phone call, and then the bottle of water. It all seems like a blur. I'm not sure how much time has passed, but it feels like hours, maybe even days. As we struggle to free myself, the door creaks open, and Pauline walks in, holding a tray of food. I can't help but feel a sense of dread as she approaches me with a smile on her face. She places the tray down in front of me and sits there, staring at me with cold, calculating eyes. Welcome back, Tina, she says, her voice cold and emotionless. I hope you're feeling better now. What do you want from me? I managed to say, my voice hoarse from dehydration. Pauline smiles again, and I can't help but shudder at the sight. You're an artist, Tina, and a talented one at that. We have a special project we want you to work on, something that requires your unique skills. I can feel the fear rising in me, and I know that I have to get out of here before it's too late. I try to reason with her, plead with her, but it's no use. Pauline is determined to keep me here until I complete whatever project this is. She gets up to leave. She turns back to me and says, Don't worry, Tina. We'll take good care of you. You're going to make us all very happy. With that, she walks out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the endless uncertainty of what is to come. I shake my head, unable to comprehend anything that is happening. As I do, I get dizzier. The light starts to fade. The room seems as though it's a long tunnel. I struggle against the bonds holding me to whatever I'm tied to. The more I struggle, the weaker I become. Eventually, the light goes out. I wake up with a pounding headache and a sense of disorientation. Everything around me was dark, and it took me a moment to realise that I was now in a small room with no windows. My heart raced as I tried to piece together what was happening, what had happened, what is happening, what's going on. The last thing I remembered was Pauline giving me food and struggling to get free before I passed out. I struggled to my feet and banged on the door, but no one answered. Panic set in as I realised I was trapped. I tried to calm myself down and think clearly. How had I ended up here, and what was going to happen to me? Suddenly, the door opened, and Pauline walked in. My heart raced as I backed away from her. She smiled, but there was a glint in her eye that made me shudder. Tina, you're awake. How are you feeling? she asked. I glared at her. What do you want from me? Where am I? She just laughed. Don't worry, dear. You're perfectly safe. You're in my basement. I needed to keep you hidden until the Harvest Festival. I felt my blood run cold. What are you talking about? Why am I here? Pauline walked closer to me, and I felt a surge of fear. You're the guest of honor, Tina. Your logo is going to be the centerpiece of the festival. It's going to be a bountiful harvest, and we need your contribution to make it perfect. I shook my head, unable to comprehend what was happening. This is insane. You can't just kidnap me like this. Pauline's expression turned cold. Oh, but I can. You don't understand, Tina. The Harvest Festival is very important to us. It's a time when we celebrate our traditions and renew our commitment to our community. And your logo is the key to it all. I stared at her in disbelief. You're insane! You're insane! Let me go! She shook her head. I'm afraid I can't do that. You're too important to us now. Don't worry. You'll understand soon enough. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the dark once again. I slumped to the ground, feeling hopeless and alone. How had I gotten into this mess? And how was I going to get out? I sat there in the basement, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was racing with fear and confusion, and I had no idea what was going on upstairs. I could hear muffled voices and the occasional burst of laughter, but it all sounded so distant and surreal. I tried to keep myself calm and focused, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. My thoughts kept going back to Pauline's cryptic words about the Harvest Festival, and the way she talked about me being the guest of honour with my logo. What did that even mean? And why did it fill me with such a sense of dread? As the hours passed, my anxiety only grew stronger. I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, and at any moment now something terrible was going to happen. I tried to distract myself by thinking about my friends and family, but even that just made me feel more isolated and alone. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally managed to calm myself down enough to start thinking clearly. I realised that I needed to find a way out of here, and fast. I didn't know what was going on upstairs, but I knew I didn't want to be a part of it. With a sense of determination, I got up from the dusty old couch and started looking around the basement for a way out. It was dimly lit and cluttered with old boxes and furniture, but I could make out a small window near the ceiling. I scrambled up to the window and tried to pry it open, but it was stuck fast. I cursed under my breath and started looking around for something to break it with. My eyes fell on an old wrench lying nearby, and I grabbed it eagerly. With all my strength, I swung the wrench at the window, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. I felt a surge of release and hope as I started to clamber up through the broken glass. Pauline came down to investigate the noise made by the broken window, and I quickly jumped down to cower elsewhere, unable to boost myself through the window before she could get to me. I cowered behind a stack of crates, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. My heart was pounding in my chest and my breathing was shallow and ragged. I knew that I had to come up with some kind of plan. Something, some way to overpower her and make it out of the window. But my mind had gone blank with fear. Pauline searched the basement for a few minutes before coming close to where I was hiding. I held my breath, hoping she wouldn't find me. But then she stopped and looked directly at me. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest.
Well, 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 she said with a sinister grin. Looks like our little guest of honor decided to take a little detour.
I didn't know what to say or do. I just stared at her, frozen with fear.
Don't worry, dear, she continued. You'll still be the star of the show. We just needed to make sure you didn't try to run away.
With that, she grabbed me roughly by my arm and dragged me back upstairs. The excited voices I had heard earlier were now louder and more intense. You could hear chanting and music, and the smell of incense filled the air. As Pauline led me into the main room, I saw that it was filled with people dressed in dark robes, gathered around a large altar. In the centre of the altar was my painting, surrounded by candles and other strange objects.
We welcome our guest of honor,
Pauline announced, and the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. I was terrified and confused. I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was that I had to find a way to get out of here before it was too late. I broke free from Pauline's grip and ran towards the door, but I was stopped by two large men wearing strange masks. They had a strong grip on me, preventing me from escaping. I struggled and tried to fight them off, but they were too strong. Pauline came up behind us, that same smile on her face.
You should have just accepted your fate. Now you've made things more difficult for yourself.
It was filled with fear and desperation as I realised that I was really and truly trapped. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, but I knew it couldn't be good. I looked around frantically for any way to escape. There was none. The two men dragged me back to the basement, where they tied me up and left me alone. I could hear them talking and laughing upstairs, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I struggled against the ropes. They were tight and caught into my skin. I was scared and alone, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of this situation. My mind was racing, and I tried to remember anything that I had learned about escaping restraints, but my mind was too clouded with fear and panic. Hours passed, and I began to lose hope. I was thirsty, hungry. My muscles ached from being tied up for so long. I wished I could go back in time and make a different choice. But it was too late for regrets now. I tried to scream for help, but it's like my voice was trapped in my throat. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan, but I was just trapped in this nightmare. There was nowhere to go. I was shaking with fear when the masked men appeared at the door. And they lifted me up by my arms and dragged me towards it. I could feel the cool air from Pauline's air conditioning against my skin. I tried to resist, but it was no use. I struggled against the two masked men who had grabbed me. But I could only watch in horror as they dragged me to the centre of the room and tied me to the altar. My screams filled the air, as the other members of the neighbourhood descended upon me, tearing at my clothes and painting strange symbols upon my skin with thick black paint. I tried to break free, but the restraints were too strong. The neighbours were chanting in some language I couldn't understand, their voices rising in intensity as they continued to paint symbols on my skin. As they finished their work, some of the neighbours stepped back and began to chant even louder. The room began to fill with smoke, and the air became thick with a pungent, sickly sweet odour. I could barely breathe, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. Please, please, you can't do this. Please, just let me go. Please. Suddenly, the smoke began to clear, and I saw that the symbols on my skin were glowing with an eerie green light. The neighbours began to dance around the altar, their movements wild and frenzied. I realised with a growing sense of horror that I was witnessing something beyond my comprehension, something ancient and sinister. The panic was rising within me, and I knew that I had to escape, but the restraints were just too strong. I tried to reason with them. But then they laughed and continued on with their ritual. As the chanting grew louder, the paint on my body turned from a green glow to a sickly yellow. I watched in horror as the symbols began to move and twist as if they were alive. A group of women began to dance around the altar, closer than ever before, and their faces contorted into grotesque, inhuman expressions. As the chanting reached a fever pitch, the men in masks grabbed a huge knife and came towards me on the altar. I struggled and I screamed as they approached. But it was no good. The knife came down towards me, and I braced for the impact. But to my surprise, they cut the bonds that held me tight, releasing me. I fell to my knees, unable to stay standing, weakened and frenzied. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light. As my vision cleared, I saw a figure standing before me. Tall, impossibly thin, and radiating an otherworldly power. The women fell to their knees in worship, their bodies writhing in ecstasy as the figure approached me. It spoke in a voice that was both soothing and terrifying, promising power and knowledge beyond my wildest dreams. But as its hand reached out to touch me, I felt an intense pain shoot through my body, and everything went black for a moment. The room had suddenly gone dark. And then the figure appeared at the centre of the circle, candles bursting to light on their own. The figure is not human. Its eyes are red, and its skin is covered in black scales. The creature surveys the room and fixes its gaze upon me, and fear grips me like a vice. The creature then speaks, satisfied that I am too scared to move, and its voice sounds like a chorus of whispers. "Welcome, my children," it says. "Tonight, we will perform the final ritual,
The one that will bring our master to this world.
I feel sick to my stomach, and bile rises in my throat. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I try to scream, but the voice catches in my throat. I can't take it anymore. I'm shaking like a leaf as the creature reaches out with a clawed hand. It begins to carve strange symbols into my flesh, and I scream in agony, unable to move. I start sobbing as my own blood leaks down from my arms, legs, chest and stomach. I cannot move a single muscle in my body and stand there paralysed as its long blackened claws carve symbols into me, the very symbols that I had used to create the logo for the festival. I don't know how. I don't know what happened, but I summoned all of my strength and somehow was able to break free of the invisible grip that was holding me in place. I heard a voice inside my head. It was a soothing voice, like a mother comforting her child. It told me to stay calm, to not be afraid. It told me that everything was going to be all right. I closed my eyes and focused on the voice, letting it fill me with a sense of peace. And as I did, I felt a warmth spreading through my body, starting from my fingertips and spreading up my arms and into my chest. When I opened my eyes again, I saw that the creature was no longer looking at me. It had turned its attention back to the women and the neighbours who were still dancing and chanting around the altar. I took the opportunity to run, bolting towards the door as fast as I could. I could hear the creature snarling behind me, but I didn't stop. I kept running, determined to get as far away from it as possible. I was out and running down the street. I just needed to get as far away from that house and that creature as humanly possible. I kept running until I was out of breath and my legs were burning. Eventually, I collapsed onto the grass in a nearby park, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. What happened next was a blur of police, doctors, medical teams and evaluations, drugs and psychiatric evaluations. I've been here now in Hawthorne Medical Centre for 3 years. No one seems to believe me. But I have the scars to prove it. They say I've gone mad. But I seem pretty sane to you, don't I?